We came in 57. I remember that, 1957. I was born in 46, so I was about 11 at the time when me and my father came out first. And we lived in LA for a while, but then when we were able to get big enough housing, because I came from a family of 17, and at that time, siblings, but at that time, when we moved in Imperial, of course, it was about 7 or 8 of us, and we needed a big place. So we moved into the project, and I was raised in that Watts area. So during that time, you didn't have the street gangs, as you know, then. It was just, they used to call it, matter of fact, I was like 12 or 13, and there was a bigger group. At that time, they were broken down into different areas, different projects. Right. They all claimed, like, the Huns were in Nicholson Garden, we were the Civilians, Orientals, and then Jordan Down Project were the Civilians, and then you had the Farmers in LA. You had all these kind of different clubs.
Sure.
And the most that we done, this is why when I started getting involved with gangs and all, and started dealing with drive-by shooting, I used to give a little presentation. I used to tell them, hey, we all were caught up with little gang type of warfare, but what I respected about our days in the late 50s, the early 60s, was you fought your enemies. We get on a gym field or something or different places, and you fight as a group or whatever.
Right.
And you didn't have no guns and all that kind of. They had weapons now. They were like bumper jacks or brass knuckles. That's how we fought. And they were like the Orientals, and our group coming up behind them was like the baby Orientals. Right. So I got caught up in all that stuff, but I didn't get deep in it because, like I said, I was from a large family. My father worked every day in the post office, you know, same mama, same daddy. And I had a father that I do a little stupid stuff, but that old saying, wait until your father get home, my mama used to say all the time, but then he dealt with me. So I kind of was intimidated not to get deep in all the mess. So I didn't get caught up in all that gang stuff. But eventually, as I grew up older, you know, and started working, and we moved out of Watts, and I got married early and stuff like that, I got involved with coaching. I was doing a lot of coaching at Imperial Course with a team I had called the Watts Magicians that were the best players, and I had a lot of that going on. So we used to take teams from Watts and from Compton to Phoenix, Arizona for tournaments and stuff. So for transportation, it was a club. We had, at that time, vans were the common vehicle that every teenager or young adult had, and you fix your van up and had that. But that was good transportation, and when I would take my teams to the tournament, I would have 2 teams, and I would have to have about 4 or 5 vans to transport them to Arizona and stuff. Well, within that group of guys that helped me, 2 of them were Compton police officers, and the other one was my friend who hooked me up with them. So that's what doing that for about 2 or 3 years, and those guys traveling with me, gave me the interest in being a police officer. So one of them, Willie Mosley, one of the main ones, talked me in, and John, they talked me into applying for a reserve at Compton PD. I was about 20, no, I was 30 something then when I got on as a.
So kind of late.
Yeah, I started late because I was working for Edison at that time, and I had a good job with Edison. But anyway,
I got to tell you real quick.
Yeah.
You and my dad had some crossover, some overlap.
I wouldn't doubt it.
There, so my dad he's older than you, just a bit, only a bit though.
Yeah,
he was born in 45.
I was born in 46.
So, and he was born in LA, and then when he was a toddler, his dad built their own house in Compton.
Okay.
So just a few blocks away from actually what Southside became Southside Crip territory later. And their house is still there, and it's right at Alondra on Long Beach Boulevard.
Gotcha.
Elizabeth Street. It's like the first street south of Alondra. When my dad was starting high school, that's when they finally, around 1960 or so, that's when they decided to get him out of there because Dominguez High had just been built. And they considered that the nicer side of town.
Right.
And then they found out he was going to be going to Compton High instead. That's when his parents was playing like, okay, we're going to leave.
We got to get out of here.
Moved down to Santa Ana, down to North Orange County. But he said it was rough. But he said the same thing as you, because in the 50s, when he was growing up there, he said nobody shot anybody. But he said we passed knives and chains back and forth in the back of class. Right before they moved away from Compton, down the street there was a shooting, and that was a rare occasion, and that was kind of the harbinger.
What year was that about?
It was around 1960 or so, 60? I would say.
Okay. I got on the police department as a reserve in 76. That's when all that gang warfare was starting to kick up. You know, this Crip blood stuff started kicking up. It had started probably about 72, 73, but it wasn't getting any notoriety and wasn't a whole lot of things going on. It wasn't no Crips Pirus type of warfare.
Right.
It was just gangs, these guys taking over. In 79, my brother, who was younger than me, he was 21 at the time, wanted to become Compton Police. And the reason why he did, because my cousin, who was formerly a LAPD captain, had came over to Compton PD as the chief. And my brother and one of his friends really wanted to get on Compton PD, and he kind of wanted them on it. But he wanted me, my cousin wanted me more than anything. But I was 30 years old, working for Edison, had a good job, kind of moving up. But so I took off a year to help my brother get through the academy. And then that's how I got started at Compton PD, and eventually got put in the gang unit and went from there. About 82, this all was brooding up. The Piru thing, the Crip thing, and all that. When I got indoctrinated, more or less, to know what the streets was all about, I had an advantage, and that's why my cousin kind of put me on a detail with a seasoned guy named Steve Beckman, who spoke fluent Spanish. He's a white guy who spoke fluent Spanish. And so they put us together in about 82, 83, when all this formulation of these different groups were going on.
All these kind of proto gangs of the Bloods and Crips were starting to come together.
They were coming together with the little war. But at the time, it was the Crips that were predominant at the time. Bloods hadn't really kicked up yet, or Pirus, I shouldn't say Piru. Blood is just a term, LA mainly, but Piru, they were kicking up. But how I got, how would you say it, indoctrinated myself, or had some idea about what they were all about. I was working, like I say, for Edison and stuff, and I used to go into these neighborhoods to collect the light bill and stuff. And me being from a big family out the project, I knew how my mama used to hide from the people coming to collect the money. So I felt bad in doing that job at Edison, turning lights off and on. But I would see the guys growing up, playing little dice games when I go to collect. And I used to help their parents and stuff. I would have to turn off the lights and stuff, but I would show them how to turn it back on after I left. So I got credit for it. So that's how I got kind of like liked in the neighborhoods, all these different little neighborhoods. That was my area in Compton. So I met a lot of these parents from different sets. Now their kids now are not anything but like 12 or 13, the little group. And I got on the police department. My cousin took me right the second year I was on and put me with this seasoned guy, Beckman. And we started documenting these subjects. And I knew at least of their families, the guys that were coming up claiming little sets, like Southside, mainly Santana Block and Atlantic Drive, all that, Kelly Park, the Crip area. The Bloods hadn't became prominent as I first started, but they wouldn't let us call ourselves a gang unit. You know, the gangs wasn't a term that they wanted to recognize, the system I'm talking about, wanted to recognize or give them no notoriety.
Sure.
Okay, they didn't want to do that. So Beckman and I were called the graffiti detail. That's what we were. And our job was to go around and start doing FI cards, field identification card, and documenting these guys that are claiming these different sets and stuff, right? So we started building up a record of it, and we would read the walls, the graffiti. You can read the walls, and it'll tell you who's starting to do all these drive-bys or crossing each other out and that. But I think it was 82, 83, I'm not sure. I was corrected in one interview about the year. But at that time, cocaine started getting introduced to the different groups, the Pirus and the Crips, as they got stuff. Cocaine was being introduced, and they start having money. So now these guys were not just starting to shoot up each other in different sets, doing the drive-bys and stuff on each other. Now they got money to get out of the hood and start having fun and socializing in white communities. And these two particular groups in about 82 or 83 were out near UCLA, that area, I forget what they called it.
Westwood?
Westwood, definitely in Westwood. And they were out there in Westwood, and they had a big shootout out there in Westwood, and a poor young lady a young lady named Karen Toshiba, she got caught with a stray, but by a stray bullet and was killed. And that all of a sudden woke the system up and stuff. And within the days or so, right after that, the LA Times came out with a big article. There's some serious gangs in LA now. It's over 2,000.
As soon as it started affecting white people or white neighborhoods.
I didn't say that, you did.
I'll say it. Anyway, I can say it.
But exactly the point. But the thing is, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. Yeah. So at that point, the warfare started kicking up, now only because they weren't shooting a 38 or they were doing drive-bys now with AK-47 stuff. We started getting to crime scenes, and it wasn't no longer 2 or 3 shell cases. It was like 25 and 30 because these cats had all this stuff. But now the papers said, okay, you have a county. This county is full of gang members. Well, my thing was, okay, I've been dealing with it for 2 or 3 years. We know this, but it was within the hood, so it wasn't notoriety. It wasn't notoriety. It had no notoriety at the time. But when Miss Toshiba got killed and stuff, shoot, on our little detail now, we were allowed to call ourselves Compton Gang Unit. We wasn't no longer a graffiti because we had to start dealing with that, and that's when we kind of went from there to that. But the shooting, another point that I wanted to make, like you said, your dad and I talked about in the early 60s and stuff, about we still had little, we used to call them social clubs, but they weren't, our warfare in a sense. But now these guys, a lot of the guys, young guys, 18, 19, got drafted into the war, the Vietnam War at the time, and they got drafted. But a lot of them were thugs and stuff. You know, when you get a draft, they didn't vet you or try to see if you had a record or nothing. Hey, you went, and you went straight to the front line. A lot of them cats wasn't cut out for it. So they didn't make it. They got discharged.
They get washed out. And
they get discharged and sent right back to the streets. But they had training. They had training.
They had weapons training, and they were using
what was
rifles
the main warfare with the Vietnam War? Hit and run. Remember, they were hiding trees. It was snipers.
Yeah.
That was the main.
Snipers and guerrilla warfare.
Guerrilla. That was the term I was looking for. Guerrilla warfare was going on. So these guys came back to the hood, some of them, with this mentality. And before you know it, shootings we start experiencing were not just dealing with your enemy straight up. They start doing drive-bys. And all of a sudden now, family members are all caught up in this warfare stuff, you know, shooting up houses, shooting up people's parents and all that. And it got crazy. That's why I used to talk to them and say, y'all cowards really to me, because y'all don't know how to face your enemy.
Right.
Y'all want to shoot, don't care if you shoot somebody's mama, sister, brother, or dog. You wouldn't care. They kind of like graduated the warfare into all this shooting and stuff. And then God forbid, when the cocaine started going to the gang members and stuff in the street and they had the money, it really, the warfare, because we didn't have any gun laws then, especially on automatic rifles and stuff, AKs and all that kind of stuff. And they were walking right in the Boulevard Auto Parts that sold guns right there on Long Beach Boulevard and buy big old caches full of
Buy an
weapons.
arsenal, yeah.
An arsenal. The arsenal were great. So that's how kind of got it doing.